this is Jose Figueroa with an approved workman where we are rightly dividing the word of truth. Welcome to another week of Bible study. I am glad that you're here as we open up God's Word one more time. Our current series is Rebuilding the Covenant Community, a study of the book of Nehemiah. If you're new to this Bible teaching ministry, here's how you can learn more about our work. You can go to our website, www.anapprovedworkman.org. That's anapprovedworkman altogether.org. You can learn about the purpose for this ministry, our approach to Bible study, and review our statement of faith. You can listen to previous episodes of our current series or any episodes from previous series. On the website, you can also subscribe to the podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Amazon Music, as well as other podcast directories. You can connect with us on social media, on Instagram at anapprovedworkman, on Pinterest, pinterest.com/anapprovedworkman, and on Facebook, our Facebook page, facebook.com/anapprovedworkman215. Finally, there are also video versions of our Bible study lessons. They're available on YouTube at youtube.com/@anapprovedworkman215. That's our handle. And on Rumble, rumble.com/c/anapprovedworkman. You can subscribe to those video channels and make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Today we're lesson number 12 in our series, Rebuilding the Covenant Community, from the book of Nehemiah. This is volume 2 of the series, After the Exile, a study of Ezra-Nehemiah-Esther. The lesson for today is titled, Organize for Life Under God, Part 2. Our focus passage is Nehemiah chapter 12, verses 27 to 47. In Nehemiah chapters 11 and 12, we see the Jewish exiles settle in Jerusalem, dedicate the wall, and establish temple procedures. So find your way in your Bible to that passage, Nehemiah chapter 12, verses 27 to 47. In our previous episode, we began our teaching of chapters 11 and 12 of Nehemiah, the study we called Organize for Life Under God. We are now in the last section of the book of Nehemiah, chapters 11 through 13. As a way of reminder, at the end of chapter 10, we saw the Jewish exiles making a series of commitments to the Lord as they renew their covenant with Him. They signed a document. But is that enough? We also talked about that we make all kinds of commitments all the time, and we don't always honor them. Will the Jewish exiles follow through on that commitment? They were well-intentioned, but their own history suggests that good intentions are not sufficient. Moses told them about it in Deuteronomy 31. Joshua repeated the same message in Joshua 24. We must purposefully set out to do what we said we would do. It does not happen by accident. In our first division, we looked at the organization of the people. We looked at chapter 11, starting in verse 1, all the way to chapter 12, verse 26. We saw several lists of names. Why are these names important to God? Why are they important to us? We have them, so God must have something to tell us about it. So let's review the principles and applications from our study of Nehemiah 11 and 12 last time. Again, it was the first division, the organization of the people, Nehemiah 11, verse 1, all the way to Nehemiah 12, verse 26. A principle, life under God requires sacrifice and commitment for the good of others. Life under God requires sacrifice and commitment for the good of others. As a way of application, we ask, what am I willing to sacrifice for the good of my covenant community? How willing am I to be counted and to commit to carry out what the Lord has called me to do for Him? And what am I doing to understand what He has equipped me to do for the kingdom? We see that our life under God requires both individual commitment and community. We're not to be lone rangers in the Christian life. We need to take our position and stand side by side with each other as we do work for God's glory and the good of others, both believers and unbelievers. If you missed our previous episode, I encourage you to listen to the podcast or watch the video version of that lesson on YouTube or Rumble. In today's lesson, we will conclude our study of Nehemiah 11 and 12. Our focus is on a special ceremony led by Nehemiah and Ezra to dedicate the rebuilt Jerusalem walls. This is the final step of Nehemiah's task that began all the way back in chapter 1, when he first heard about the despair of the Jewish people and the desolation of the city. It is a beautiful ceremony, filled with worship and a recommitment to follow the Torah. In his Bible commentary, Dr. John MacArthur sets the context for this moment of celebration. He tells us, quote, "In the same manner, marking the dedications of the temple in Solomon's day and the rebuilt temple several decades earlier, the rebuilt walls were dedicated with the music of thanksgiving, most likely shortly after the events of chapter 9." End quote. I love that phrase, the music of thanksgiving, and that spirit of thanksgiving is prevalent throughout this ceremony. In his commentary on Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah, Dr. Mervyn Brenneman provides us with additional insights into this ceremony. He says, quote, "God calls us to celebration as well as service. The law even commands thankfulness and rejoicing. All had been completed. The decree of Cyrus had been fulfilled, and the community had been restored. The prophecy of Jeremiah had begun to be fulfilled, and the stage was now set for the completion of God's work in Israel. All of this will be acknowledged in the dedication of the work brought about by God." End quote. So again, we're going to see God's people celebrating his work on their lives, and with a spirit of humility and a spirit of thanksgiving, ready for a beautiful worship celebration. Here's our lesson outline and goal for our teaching from Nehemiah 11 and 12. Again, this is a teaching called Organized for Life Under God. Last time we looked at the organization of the people, chapter 11 verse 1 through chapter 12 verse 26. Today our focus is the dedication of the wall, verses 27 through 47 of chapter 12. And our goal for our teaching is this: to encourage believers to remember that living according to God's ways requires wholehearted commitment and intentionality. Again, the goal for the teaching from Nehemiah 11 and 12 is this: to encourage believers to remember that living according to God's ways requires wholehearted commitment and intentionality. So let's get started with this second and final division, the dedication of the wall, Nehemiah 12, 27 through 47. Now, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out the Levites from other places to bring them to Jerusalem so that they could celebrate the dedication with joy, with songs of thanksgiving, and with songs to the accompaniment of cymbals, harps, and lyres. So the sons of the singers were assembled from the territory around Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites, from Beth Gilgal, and from their fields in Geba and Asmaveth, because the singers had built themselves villages around Jerusalem. The priests and the Levites purified themselves. They also purified the people, the gates, and the wall. Verse 31. Then I had the leaders of Judah come up on top of the wall, and I appointed 2 large choirs, the first proceeding to the right on top of the wall toward the dung gate. Hoshaiah and half of the leaders of Judah followed them, with Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, Jeremiah, and some of the sons of the priests with trumpets, and Zechariah the son of Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micaiah, the son of Zakur, the son of Asaph, and his kinsmen, Shemaiah, Azarel, Milalai, Gilalai, Maai, Nethanel, Judah, and Hanani, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God, and Ezra the scribe went before them. At the fountain gate, they went directly up the steps of the city of David by the stairway of the wall above the house of David to the water gate on the east. Verse 38. The second choir proceeded to the left, while I followed them with half of the people on the wall, above the tower of furnaces to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, by the ancient gate, by the fish gate, the tower of Hananel and the tower of the 100, as far as the sheep gate, and they stopped at the gate of the guard. Then the two choirs took their positions in the house of God. So did I, and half of the officials with me. And the priests, Eliakim, Maaseiah, Miniamin, Micaiah, Elionai, Zechariah, and Hananiah with the trumpets. And Maaseiah, Shemaiah, Eleazar, Uzi, Jehohanan, Malchijah, Elam, and Ezer. And the singers sang with Jezariah, their leader. And on that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, because God had given them great joy, and the women and children rejoiced as well, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard from far away. Verse 44. On that day, men were also appointed over the chambers for the supplies, the contributions, the firstfruits, and the tithes, to gather into them from the fields of the cities the portions required by the law for the priests and Levites. For Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who served. For they performed the worship of their God and the service of purification, together with the singers and the gatekeepers, in accordance with the command of David and of his son Solomon. For in the days of David and Asaph, in ancient times, there were leaders of the singers, songs of praise, and songs of thanksgiving to God. So all Israel, in the days of Zerubbabel and Nehemiah, gave the portions due the singers and the gatekeepers as each day required. And they set apart the consecrated portion for the Levites, and the Levites set apart the consecrated portion for the sons of Aaron. Nehemiah 12, 27 through 47. Let's look at this division by first looking at verses 27 through 30, the purification. In verses 27 and 29, we're told that for this special occasion, they call for the Levites from every city to come to Jerusalem to celebrate with joy, with songs of thanksgiving, accompanied by cymbals, harps, and lyres, as Psalm 150 commands us to do. It's an all-inclusive effort, all hands in. Also, the sons of the singers came from the territory around Jerusalem, from the villages of the Nethophathites, and from Beth Gilgal, and from their fields in Geba and Asmaveth. Remember, most of the people are not living in Jerusalem. They're spread out through the villages. Part of what we saw in Nehemiah 11 is that 1/10 of every family moved into Jerusalem, but most of the people, including those who work in the temple worship services, lived around the villages. But for this occasion, everybody is being called in. In verse 30, we're told that the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they also purified the people, the gates, and the wall. Again, it's a special occasion of worship and celebration, and they needed to get themselves and the people ready. This tells us that we must always consider how we prepare ourselves for the worship of our God. In his commentary on Ezra and Nehemiah, Dr. Derek Kidner speaks on how the Jewish exiles show us the proper way to prepare for worship. He says, quote, "Elaborate festivities can be hollow, but where the occasion is great, the demanding business of planning, proclaiming, assembling, and rehearsing makes good kindling material for the emotions. Not a substitute for the more searching preparations seen in verse 30, where nobody and nothing was left unpurified, but not by any means to be despised. If the New Testament emphasizes what is inward and spiritual in worship, it has a place too for the natural means of encouraging and steering us. Our Lord went to Gethsemane, fortified not only by prayer, but by a ceremonial meal and corporate singing, matters which engage not only the spirit, but the body and the senses. End quote. Let's look ahead to verses 31 through 43 and talk about these two large choirs. Verses 31 through 36. Nehemiah appointed two large choirs for the celebration. He's still leading the people. He's steadfast and determined to see this task through. So they start on top of the wall towards the Dawn Gate. They have the leaders of Judah. They have some of the priests. They have people with trumpets. They have the musical instruments of David, the man of God. This could be the same instruments from David's day, returned by Cyrus after Nebuchadnezzar took him in the third wave of exile, or it could be instruments made in the same fashion. The point is, they're going back to the proper worship instituted under David. And who's leading them? Ezra, our friend, the priest and scribe, who has been leading his people well in the instruction of the Torah, and now is leading them in the proper worship. Verse 37, this first choir went all the way up to the steps of the city of David and to the water gate on the east. Then, verses 38 and 39, the second choir proceeded to the left, and Nehemiah followed with them all the way to the gate of the guard. Verses 40 through 42, the two choirs took their positions in the temple. That included Nehemiah, half of the officials with him, the priests with the trumpets. They also have singers led by Ezra-Nehemiah. So in verse 43, this is the climax of this moment. The people offer great sacrifices and rejoice because God had given them great joy. And the women and children rejoice as well, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard from far away. In the midst of this return, even with their situation not being ideal, the people were thankful and they worshipped. No matter where we are in life as God's people, we should always be ready to worship Him. This is a great witness to an unbelieving world. Dr. John MacArthur speaks of how this kind of moment is what God wants for His people at all times. He says, quote, "The God of all joy activated their inner joy, which brought corporate celebration. Though these may have been few and far between, moments like this characterize the life of obedience and blessing which God has set before Israel." End quote. Amen. Dr. J. Vernon McGee, in his commentary on Ezra-Nehemiah-Esther, speaks on how this rejoicing must be a critical element of our witnessing efforts. He says, quote, "One of the reasons people pass by the church today is because they think we're a dead and boring lot. And 9 times out of 10, they are correct. There ought to be more of the joy of the Lord in our services today, real joy." In the epistle to the Philippians, we all find that the very source of power is joy. And remember that Nehemiah said, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." As we consider this celebration, let's hear from Dr. Brenneman, who tells us how this great celebration can be an example to us today. He says, quote, "This must have been an impressive celebration. We need to find ways to unite the community and glorify God together. Special celebrations are a help to the believing community and a testimony to the unbelievers. The emphasis on continuity with what David had done reminds us that an understanding of our place in history and our solidarity with former generations of Christians are vital. We too must see ourselves as part of God's continuing plan. Here, as elsewhere in the Old Testament, thanksgiving and celebration were expressed through sacrifice. Although the type of sacrifice is different in New Testament worship, sacrifice is still important. Romans 12:1, Philippians 4:18, Hebrews 13:15. If we love God, we must give ourselves and our goods to Him." End quote. Let's now look at the last portion of this chapter, verses 44 through 47, the great worship commitment. In verses 44 through 46, we see that on that very day, Men were also appointed over the chambers for the supplies, the contributions, the first fruits, and the tithes, to gather into them from the fields of the cities the portions required by the law for the priests and Levites. The people of Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who served. They really greatly appreciated those who led in worship among them. They made a fresh commitment to provide them with what was required for them according to the Torah. How appreciative are we of those whom God has appointed to lead us? These men, the Levites, the priests, the singers, they performed the worship of their God and the service of purification together with the singers and the gatekeepers in accordance with the command of David and of his son Solomon. We're told that in the days of David and Asaph, in ancient times, there were leaders of the singers, songs of praise and songs of thanksgiving to God. The people needed to maintain that continuity with those times that were good times because they were following God's way in everything, especially in worship. So what they're doing here is continuing making that connection to the proper instructions to worship God in the Torah, to how to handle the temple operations, how to provide for temple operations. And we're told here, as a way of closing, that in verse 47, that in the days of Zerubbabel and the days of Nehemiah, while those two leaders were in place, the people of Israel gave the portions due to the singers and gatekeepers daily as required. They also set apart the consecrated portion for the Levites, and then the Levites in turn set apart their consecrated portion for the priests, the sons of Aaron. So in this new stage where the people are in this return to the land from exile, the commitment to follow the Torah and the proper operation of the temple were going to be essential to the prosperity of God's covenant community. In his Bible commentary, Dr. Tony Evans speaks on this fresh commitment from the Jewish exiles. He says, quote, "When the people got right with God, they prioritized things. They brought in the contributions and tithes. If modern believers really understood what the church is and the influence that we could make, there will be no problem getting Christians to serve and give and invest in eternal things. Our thinking must be conformed to the divine perspective so that our actions follow. Too many Christians are trying to live in two kingdoms. They are trying to serve God and serve the world order at the same time, and you can't do that. We have a desperate need for people who will put God's kingdom first." End quote. But in order to be sustainable, that commitment must be from the heart, not just with an external facade. At this point in time, it seems the people are ready from the heart. Will this continue? Well, that brings us to the end of this second division of Nehemiah 11 and 12. What's our principle? Life under God requires a heart of worship. Life under God requires a heart of worship. Bless the Lord, my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, and do not forget any of his benefits. Who pardons all your guilt, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with favor and compassion, who satisfies your years with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagle. Psalm 103, verses 1 through 5. How am I celebrating God's work in my life? How am I worshiping him on an ongoing basis for who he is and what he has done for me? How am I organizing to carry out the work he has called me to do for him? How am I applying the scriptures in my life on a daily basis? Well, that's our lesson for today. How can we apply what we have learned in Nehemiah 11 and 12? What are the questions that you and I need to consider as we look forward to our lives under God? So we want to live properly, correctly, in step, in alignment with God, life under him. Let's look at this from a series of questions for you and for me. First, what's your posture before God? Are we walking in humility before him? Are we thankful at all times to Him? The example I see from the covenant community in these two chapters is that even in a situation that was not ideal, they're not under an Israeli king, they are servants of the Persian Empire. They really are backing the land, but they're not in control. But this beautiful ceremony recognizes what God has done for them. So they're thankful. They're worshiping. They're humble before Him because He knows who He is and what He has done for them. Are we the same? Do we have the right posture before God? Second question. Where is our spot, your spot, my spot in the covenant community? Have you discovered your spiritual gift or gifts? Most Christians have more than one, but you at least have one spiritual gift. Do you know what that is? Second question. How are you using your spiritual gifts for the good of the community of believers, for the glory of God, and for the blessing of unbelievers? You see this list of names and roles: priests, singers, gatekeepers. Everybody's involved. The governor Nehemiah is involved. Everybody has something to do that day, and they're all taking their spot, whether it's to sing or to play instruments or to make a commitment to bring the contributions to the temple chambers. Everybody knew what to do, and they were ready to do it. Are we ready to understand what our spot is in the covenant community and to do it? Third question. What are you willing to sacrifice for the kingdom? What am I willing to sacrifice for the kingdom? What cost are we prepared to pay to follow Christ? What are our priorities? We saw in chapter 11 how 1/10 of the families volunteered to live in Jerusalem. Now, they drew lots, but they still carry out with that commitment at a price, at a cost. You see in this ceremony, they committed to bring what was needed for the temple operations, for the priests and for the Levites. So, what are we willing to sacrifice for the kingdom? And finally, where is your heart? Where is my heart? What you see here with this community is that they were worshiping God from the heart. It was a great time of celebration. It was a joyful time. So the question for you and me is that, is worship an event or a lifestyle? Are we just going through the motions, or are we really living to worship God? How are we giving ourselves first to the Lord? So those are questions to ask as we seek to live life under God. What's your posture before God? Where is your spot in the covenant community? What are you willing to sacrifice for the kingdom? And where is your heart? This concludes our teaching from Nehemiah chapters 11 and 12. Thank you for being here today. Next time, we will begin our study of Nehemiah 13 as we move forward to closing the study of this great book. Until then, this is Jose Figueroa for an approved workman, where we are rightly dividing the word of truth. May God richly bless you.